welcome back our dedicated listeners. Today we are diving into the fascinating world of law and technology with one of the nicest people I have ever met, Mr. Biswarup Ghosh. He is an engineer and an IITian, but with a twist. He actually pursued law from Rajiv Gandhi School of Intellectual Property Law at IIT Kharagpur. As usual, this podcast is also divided into two parts. In the first part, Vishwarup shares his experiences at IIT Kharagpur and his thoughts on the biggest challenges faced by in-house counsels today. We'll also try to damage his professional reputation by making him answer a very silly question, which is as to whether lawyers at tech companies should have a special dress code. To kick off things, Biswarup, do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you very much, Abhi. Now, for the listeners, I am Biswarup. I am a legal counsel with Cambium Networks. I am an engineer turned lawyer. And I have been working in few of the very large technology companies so far as part of my portfolio that I have built so far. So what has happened is I have started working in the area of IP, intellectual property. From there, I used to work for a large US MNC called Honeywell. From there on, I then moved on to work for an Indian MNC called Fractal Analytics. And there I would go on to work in the area of, I would take care of contracting. I would get introduced into the world of privacy. And of course, IP stayed with me. Then I went on to expand a bit. I would actually get into India advisory sort of work. And then I moved to Cambium Networks where I am right now. With Cambium Networks, I'm kind of the partner to the business for Asia Pacific, taking care of all the sort of legal requirements that come up in this region. That's one. And second is I am responsible for the IP portfolio management for this organization, as well as a couple of other projects on privacy and wherever there is a product which is being released by Cambium Networks. So I'm the legal counsel who is taking care of the regulatory requirements, as well as any of the requirements that are to be taken care of when that product releases into the market. So that's on the professional side. On the personal side, I'm a huge fan of music and I play a little bit of percussion instruments, and I have been trying to learn as much as I can and occasionally play in front of the public, not too much. And I have recently been blessed with a baby boy.
Wow.
So he's the one who kind of takes a lot of, my attention beyond work.
So what is percussion instruments? I'm sorry, I am not aware of it.
So think of a tabla or think of a bongo.
Mm-hmm.
This is what will be considered as a percussion instrument. These are the kind of things. So I essentially can play a little bit of tabla. I do play a little bit of djembe. I play a little bit of bongo. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
I'm really happy to hear that. I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, just one that I didn't learn a musical instrument. So I'm happy that you didn't do the same mistake. So, I'm sure you and your, young kid can now play the musical instruments together. That would be an amazing experience. Like one of the few people, right, who have still listed on their LinkedIn profile, because I was looking at your LinkedIn profile before this interview, who has still listed what they did in their law college. So I'm going to ask you, like, how was your experience in pursuing law from IIT Kharagpur? Because it has a completely different vibe and it's not meant for law, right? So how was your experience pursuing law from IIT Kharagpur?
IIT Kharagpur law, I would say it's a very unique experience. The IIT Kharagpur has unique advantage. Law is one of the departments of IIT Kharagpur. It places any of the department and any of the people studying in any of these departments among various other people who are essentially studying something different, right? So there are people who would be pursuing their BTech in different engineering branches. There would be again people who would be doing their MTechs. Then there would be people who would be doing their MBAs, then MHRM. So IIT Kharagpur has a variety of courses that are offered over there. One thing that I always remember very fondly from my IIT Kharagpur experience was, first of all, the professors were absolutely amazing. If I have to imagine a really world-class sort of education experience, then IIT Kharagpur is one. The reason is we would have professors who have actually been there and done that. So therefore, hearing those kind of things during our courses was one of its kind experience. That was on the learning side. Then on the other pieces, we would continuously be motivated and we would continuously be working with few of our alumni, few of our seniors, and then juniors as well. So these people have gone ahead and done, again, amazing stuff in their career, and not just being a lawyer. So they would have done different types of things in their career. So hearing from them and then having a role model right in front of you is, it sets you out right at the beginning of the career. And then additionally, what would happen is, since I mentioned that, we would have BTechs, MTechs, and all of those people, PhDs. So there are opportunities to go ahead and build a startup. I happened to create one while I was at IIT Kharagpur. And I mean, very interesting sort of ideas will be bounced upon. So we would have people from these various different kind of branches coming together and trying to create something, solving a problem. At that point of time, I got an opportunity to work with people who were doing their PhDs, then a couple of people from their BTechs, and we came together and wanted to design a product for management of the waste. That was one of its kind experience for me, because then you get into the world of business. You get to see the nitty-gritties of it, and immediately there would be fundings available from IIT Kharagpur itself, and then there would be fundings available from alumnus, etc. All in all, it's a wholesome experience. In fact, I got multiple opportunities to go out and participate into moot court competitions at that point of time. I would write papers. I mean, one of my papers actually became a best student paper in conference in Oro University, Surat. So I had actually got an opportunity to travel across India while I was studying there. I had traveled to Bhopal, I had traveled to Surat, I had traveled to Thiruvananthapuram. When I look back, all these experiences kind of shape the world view of young chap who is basically going to get out in the market and want to, make their mark. All in all, it was a fascinating experience. I mean, if I were to given an opportunity and go back into those 3 years and then spend again, I would do it any day.
Couldn't agree more. The opinion that you hold about the college, right, going back and living those years, I think a lot of us also have the same opinion about our alma mater. Law at IIT Kharagpur has a lot of advantages. But, one of the negative points that I get to hear from some people is that, kind of forces you to specialize in IP. What are your thoughts on that?
We can't hear enough of it. I would essentially see it as a mixed bag sort of an experience, in the sense, what happens is the law school was built with an intention to create professionals who are from engineering, science, and say some of them from medical professionals, and coming and studying law to become IP professionals. Over the period of time, the law school has evolved, and then the course curriculum, how it at least used to happen at that point of time, would introduce us into these various different other areas of law. Now, having said that, if the question is it easier to break into the IP as a profession from IIT Kharagpur Law School? Yes, it does, because it has got an immediate recognition in this particular area. But also, having said that, does it mean that the students get limited to only pursuing IP as a profession? No, it doesn't. I mean, it is pretty much evident from quite a few of us who have actually ventured outside of IP. I work in a generalist role within the organization at this point of time. And there are a few of us who have ventured into litigation. Few of us, in fact, have moved into policy work as well. What happens is, once we are into the profession, the technology bent of the mind and as well as the analytical skills that we would have gathered, that comes into being and helps us in moving into some other spaces. So yes, I mean, like I said, it's a mixed bag. If someone were to come out of the IIT Kharagpur Law School and want to get started somewhere, IP is definitely still, I would say, the biggest place to get started with. But then yes, the opportunities in other places are absolutely immense.
Absolutely. So let's start with a fun question. Do you think that lawyers at tech companies should have a special dress code? If yes, then what should it be?
Well, that's such a nice question, Abhi. I mean, what I do within a tech company is sitting with my engineers and working as a bridge between what this complicated law, regulation, statutes, all of this, and what essentially makes sense for my company, for my engineers. Now, one part of it is that, I mean, any engineer would find it really, I would say, stifling if they were speaking with someone who doesn't speak in their language, who doesn't, at least to certain extent, look like them. To a certain extent, do not feel what they are essentially, trying to bring to table. Now, if I think of a dress code is essentially a mechanism of bringing uniformity. Now, within a tech company, I mean, my engineers are breaking barriers. They are innovating. They are creating something new out of, something which was not existent till yesterday. So therefore, I prefer to look slightly like them.
Right.
And if I were to think and be a Manish Malhotra for a tech company lawyer, so I would essentially go with, say, short with, say, a shirt, but still with a tie, right? Maintain the flavor, but the dish will look a little different. So that's my take. Yeah.
Great answer there. And one of the reasons that we kind of like you approached you, because you had this interesting profile that you are an engineer, ventured into law. So what was your motivation there?
Post my engineering, I had in fact at that point of time had joined in a very large Indian MNC as a graduate engineer trainee. And even while pursuing my engineering, I had gone ahead and done certain trainings with very large power sector companies and so on and so forth. So while working over there and while being on the floor at that age, of course, I mean, you can only know so much. I will be fooling myself if I would say that I had a complete clarity of mind at that age and know what I am going to do in my 30s, in my 40s, so on and so forth. But at that point, I felt I need to get into something which is going to keep me interested at least for 10 years, right? Something which is going to keep me motivated. I see a career path, I flourish, and of course, I see a little bit of success while doing all of this. So now when figuring out all of this, I realized that MBA is definitely not my cup of tea then at that point of time, which is a very normal progression from being an engineer to doing an MBA and getting into big management profiles. Of course, I went ahead and met a couple of different people who have pursued law. And then I stumbled upon some people who have done law out of IIT Kharagpur, this particular law school. And I really liked their journey. Even in those few years that they had gone out of college, the kind of things that they were able to do, the immediate impact that they were creating, I was hoping to do exactly the same after I would have come out of the college. So that was a prime motivation. I mean, not continue to do what is not going to keep me interested for a long time. And when I pursue something else, I land up somewhere where, there are some interesting stuff going on. That's what brought me here.
Wow. Such a courageous decision, I must say. Now, let me start with your easy question. The question is, what is the biggest challenge that you face as an in-house counsel?
Well, this is the first time that you have got me thinking a little bit. But Abhi, I mean, see, as an in-house counsel, we are essentially continuously trying to figure out, this is a global world that we are living in. The company goes ahead and sells in multiple countries. It comes down to us to figure out what are those kind of regulatory challenges which the company is likely to face when they want to enter into business in each of these countries. And when I say enter into business, I need to say right from the time when the company wants to set up a shop, say in a new country where it wants to get in, then want to hire some people out of those countries, then goes ahead and figures out how does it, say, manufacture a certain product if it were to manufacture in those countries. And in case it doesn't manufacture in those countries, so then how does the company move products from other country into those countries? And then figuring out how do we navigate through the regulatory pieces, approvals, licenses, these are required to sell into those countries. Now, the biggest challenge that I face today is to keep tab of this very dynamically changing landscape which is happening all around us. A simple example to take will be, say, the way the privacy works. Every other day, there is a new privacy regulation that comes up. And then there are some very country-specific requirements which come into being. Now, as a lawyer, it is our responsibility to adequately advise the internal customers so that there are no apparent legal issues, which does not arise because the product is being sold in those countries. So if I were to categorize on a 30,000 feet level, what would have made my life little easier? It would be to have on the top of my palm something which will help me navigate each of these complexities, which are very country specific. That's how it is.
Biswarup, my follow-up question would be like, how do you keep track of all the regulations? And, as an in-house counsel, how do you understand that, certain things has come into the picture? For instance, some of your software is using open source software. If that's the case, you will have to have certain different type of IP clause in the end user agreement. So how do you keep track of things?
It's interesting that you talked about open source. What I'll do is I'll just break it up into two questions. One is how do we keep track of what are these kind of regulatory changes, and then go specific into what we do with respect to open source. Keeping track of these kind of changes, essentially the strategies that we take. Number one, of course, we keep on reading.
Right.
It might sound very simple, simplistic, but then it always works. So if there is a country of interest where we have to get in, we would have broken down into what are the kind of areas that we need to understand. And we essentially keep on reading. There are these doing business in guides which are available. Some of the largest law firms out there, they essentially publish these kind of guides. So that keeps us updated on what is going to come up, what is happening, what are the kind of requirements, what are the changes which have come up, and what is going to come up next. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we continue to keep good relationship with various law firms which are there in that particular country. Because even if I were to understand theoretically each of these regulations which would have come up, but the nuances might actually determine how that will be functioned. So that is the second thing. So we essentially build relationship. I mean, that's why it is absolutely important for us in-house counsels to also go ahead and continuously meet people to understand how they have perceived, they have understood, because we really can't be always aware or always ready with those kind of aspects. That is the second bit. And the third bit is, of course, whenever we have understood that there is some part of it that we are anticipating or some part of it is going to come up, we put it down into a process. Because as soon as we have built certain processes around it, the chances of us missing some nuances go down drastically. Now here I am going to talk to you about what do we do with respect to open source. Now, open source is a very dynamic area where there are these tons of developments which keep on happening. Today, we have certain number of, say, open source software which is getting utilized. Tomorrow, there would be new open source software which will come up. So what we do is we set up a process within the organization, and I'm talking very generally right now. The organization would go ahead and have at the point where a software is going to go to production. Right before that, we will essentially start a scanning of that software. The scanning of the software, either it could be a third-party tool or it could be even an internally developed tool, which goes ahead and scans the complete code against any of these kind of open source which it can hit up. So when we have scanned, now some of these open source software that we encounter after the scan has happened, we would have encountered already. So we know what are the kind of challenges. Is it under a license which is copyleft? If it is under a license where we can easily integrate it with the proprietary software, so on and so forth. And then therein we actually come across some of the software where, say, a new type of licenses would have come. So that flows into our workflow for approval of those kind of. So essentially now we go into those kind of licenses, we figure out what are these challenges which are there with these licenses, what are the risks with this open source software, and then there is an approve or reject sort of a mechanism, or sometimes we work with the engineers to enable them to comply with the licenses, and then we move ahead. I just wanted to give you a flavor of what happens. I mean, we will continue to track the open source. Sometimes we know it. Sometimes there's something which we encounter. And since we have put it down in the process, the chances are we are not going to miss something which is.
No, I have two follow-up questions actually to that. The first follow-up question is to the first statement when you said about building relationship with the law firms and the external legal service providers, right? So I have a controversial question there. There's this one school of thought which says that people who have earlier done litigation and have worked in a law firm and then they become a corporate in-house counsel, they tend to perform better. Then there's another school of thought who says that, that's not the case. If somebody has been a corporate legal counsel in one particular industry, like say, like electronics, right? If he has an experience in that, those kind of people tends to perform a lot better. So that's my first follow-up question. What are your 2 cents on that? I know you belong to the latter group, right? Because you
No,
have
that's why I'm trying to I mean, I'm trying to be a little neutral about it because I mean, I cannot be absolutely neutral about it because I really am in the later group. I have actually worked and I have very closely interacted with people of the first group as well, who have moved from the traditional practice or sometimes law firms, and then they have moved into in-house, and then they have been very successful in their in-house job. And of course, I mean, there are this second group as well, which has been immensely successful in their in-house job.
absolutely.
Now, fundamentally, there is a difference between how, say, advisory would work when you are outside of an organization and you are essentially advising that organization, especially for contentious issues, and versus when you are inside an organization and you are mostly responsible to preempt most of these contentious issues from happening. And then in some cases, you also have to handle inadvertently some contentious issues have happened. Now, what happens is that in both of these, a person who is ready to put in their hours, the success is guaranteed. So there is no doubt about it. The question is what increases the probability of anyone who is in any of these groups to become successful. Now, in the first group, what happens is that people generally tend to identify the legal issues really quickly by practice, by having done that again and again and again. So that comes very naturally to them. But when required to translate it into a business action, they need to build up. When I said that someone who is ready to put in that hard work, this is where they are essentially putting in the hard work and the number of hours that they need. On the second group, on the contrary, since we are born with the business, so therefore it automatically comes in the understanding of how a business works. What are the kind of nitty-gritties with respect to the business? What is going to work with my HR team versus what is not going to work with my finance team? But then identifying of the legal issues is something which has to come at this snap of the finger. And that's what it makes a good in-house counsel. So I would like to end my statement with a statement from John Veninati. I used to, look up to him while I was at Honeywell. So he would say that, see, you have to be able to identify the issues very quickly. You have to have that knack of identifying where the issue lies. And then after that, you have to start thinking, wearing the hat of a business. In some cases, you mitigate. In some cases, you fight. In some cases, you leave it as it is. It doesn't mean that you haven't taken an action. You have to still take an action. But that is where you have to figure out how you do that. And if you are able to do both properly, you have been successful. And that's what I have been following. And, I hope to continue to build my overall expertise around this.
Wow, great thoughts. But you haven't given the answer. Who are more likely to succeed?
Well,
you have given a very diplomatic answer here. Let's be honest.
Well, I was trying to give you a mathematical answer, which became a little diplomatic. So my mathematical answer is that if it is X, where you already have the legal skills, you know how to read the law, and you can build in that Y, where you know the business, which sometimes is evidently lacking because you don't need to do that always. And on the other end, you essentially know Y, and you need to build in that X. And then together you are building X plus Y plus delta Y, and you are building X plus Y plus delta X.
I know why you are using equations just to confuse the lawyer, because most lawyers are bad with maths. You don't want to give the answer. So now you have brought in the equations to confuse me. But I'll let it slide. So now the second follow-up question that I wanted to ask, when you talked about building a policy and then building a process around it. So what are your thoughts on our law colleges actually not even teaching at the 101 on this level? Our law college, even the best one, will tell you how to draft a policy. But how do you implement a policy, especially in large organizations? What are your thoughts on this?
See, this is the problem. Before we end up thinking about a solution, we have to recognize that this is a problem. And there is a major gap between what we get taught within a law school and what essentially translates into practice. In my mind, I would not categorize myself as someone who has been extraordinary about it. So it is a learning curve that I took. You start with doing the basic grunt work and you keep on building on top of it, to the extent where you understand what is the bigger picture, from where essentially now it comes in how you manage your stakeholder, and then you build in this kind of policies, processes, whatever we are talking about. Now, unfortunately, a law student who is now coming out is unlikely to even get that opportunity to do it right out of the school. So that is one part. But to your question, is it possible to teach, at least give a flavor of this to a law student? Yes, it is. I mean, I am a huge fan of Law Sequel, what they have been doing in the world of legal education. What they have been able to pull up, have been able to achieve is immense. And this is something which I believe there should not be one Law Sequel, there should be many of these kind of Law Sequel. And at some point of time, it has to penetrate and it has to become a lot more mainstream in the sense that it has to have a lot more variations catering to different type of law students. And when I think about it, we end up generalizing law students or law schools into, say, one unified sort of a group, which unfortunately is not the case. I mean, even within our Indian law education system, there are these various different types of law schools that we keep on seeing. Some of these law schools inherently are very sophisticated. I mean, you talk about national law school, if you talk about my law school, you talk about similar kind of law schools which are there. They are inherently a little bit more sophisticated. The kind of exposure that they get is, I would say, a little bit more than what some other law schools or the students in those law schools end up getting. For them, where they don't get those kind of exposure, the question is essentially bread and butter. So therefore, they are not really bothered with understanding these nuances. They are really figuring out, after I do my law education, can I go ahead and start my practice? Can I go ahead and find a place in a law firm? Right. Can I go ahead and find a place in a corporate law department? Right. So for them, the question is not to find sophistication right at the beginning, right, but, to find a place. So for those kind of cases, I really do not think bridge course or something is actually sufficient. Yes, but we still have to continue to work towards it. The students, if they start getting exposure right at the law school, working with these firms, working with these corporates, how does it work? It prepares them well for sure. But I do not really have any answer as to how, that can be immediately solved. But yes, one thing that could be done better is to update the courses. I mean, the kind of thing that are getting taught, yes, extremely important. But yes, I think that requires some bit of an update.
Right, because the curriculums are stuck in an era where, you would graduate, you'll join a senior lawyer. Like corporate legal counsels and the kind of job they end up doing, they need to know a lot of management principles, right? Which are like not even touched upon. This is the end of the first part. Thanks to our listeners for joining us today. See you in the next part. As always, stay curious, stay adaptable, and never stop learning.